Welcome to Zen Money Monday, weekly conversations with innovators, thought leaders, and entrepreneurial junkies about building good businesses, exploring what the idea of Zen money really means, and how to achieve it. With your host, author, business strategist, and Zen Money CFO, Liz LaJoy.
Alex, I'm so excited to have you join us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am very excited myself.
So in the intro, I shared a little bit about, this business that you and Kurt have built from a video production standpoint. I really want to use today to share some of your areas, your insights and expertise around video creation and the massive, we need content all the time and it needs to be really fancy and pretty reality that we live in. And then also dig a little bit into, what it's been like over the last 10 years for you guys.
Great. Sounds good. Where do you want to start?
I want to know how you got into the video production business, first of all, and second of all, like how you guys decided to open your doors way back in the day.
Sure. So I have known my business partner for about 20 years, but 10 years ago, I have a friend who I was working with then at the company change.org, and I worked at Change very early on, and my friend who's actually still there, Danny Moldovan, his grandfather was 91, and the family wanted to capture the grandfather's history. And so I said, I know I was close with Al Moldovan, who has since passed. And so I felt comfortable talking with him and interviewing him. And I said, I know a guy who I can get to come down here and actually shoot this, my business partner now, Kurt. And Kurt and I really enjoyed working together. And then we were like, how else can we work together? So we put together a web series about Maine food called Food Coma TV. And one of the people that we covered in one of those episodes, one of the companies that we covered said, we need an ad for YouTube. Could we use some of the content that you made and then maybe we'll do a voiceover? And we were like, oh, I wonder if more people would want that. And it turns out a lot more people wanted that. And so that's essentially how we started. We had a third business partner at the time because we were much more focused on both video and commercial photography. So we had a business partner who was focused on commercial photography, but he's since moved on to open his own commercial studio. But that's our story in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about the jangling you're hearing. My dog below me is very interested in this podcast.
Excellent. You like all of the interaction we can get.
Very good.
How was that stepping out of an organization like change.org and moving into your own, we're doing this, this is official kind of thing?
Well, so actually, now that I think about it, I was this was a contact I had at Change, but I wasn't working at Change at the time. I was actually working for a nonprofit organization, a progressive nonprofit organization, overseeing their communications. That nonprofit that I worked at for about a year and a half is the only company I've worked at internally in my entire professional life, outside of working retail as a teenager. And so a big part of when we formally started this company, I was 28. And what I knew was my strength is that I could think and work outside the box. My weakness is I couldn't for the life of me see working inside of an organization. I just didn't know how. I used to think that it was a strength, like I was interesting or that was my personality trait. And just the reality was I was terrified of a thing I didn't know how to do. I think that was it. And so I was like, well, I know these guys who have these skill sets. Maybe we can just work as kind of a loose collective. And that's like kind of
freelancers together sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I knew that they didn't like the business part of business. And I knew I didn't necessarily know the business part of business, but that I was capable of knowing it because of the different companies that I'd worked at that point. So we kind of merged those things because I knew that they hated acquiring new business. They hated putting together scopes of work. They hated all of that stuff. And I was like, well, I don't have any of your talents and I admire all of your talents. So maybe there's a way we can work together. And we were so naive early on. It wasn't hard, it was hard because I was the first of us to work full time. And then the commercial photographer, he was the second to work full time. And then eventually Kurt came on a couple years later. And so doing things like making those individual leaps, I think were the hardest things initially. It should have been hard, to be honest. Like if had we done I don't regret any of the ways that we did it. But had we done it with some degree of order that would have saved us headaches later, it would have been a little harder than it was.
Mm. It's funny that you say that. I was over here just kind of shrugging my shoulders about that, because I think this whole business thing, like, there's a gajillion different ways to start. There's a gajillion different ways to set yourself up. Obviously, there are certain things that have to happen. But aside from that, I think everybody has sort of a different version of where was the hiccup, what was the thing that I was like, oh, I thought that was going to be a problem, and it turned out not to be, or vice versa. And so I think that starting a business can be easy. And maybe the naivete is actually a good thing, because you're like, well, I'll just deal with the fire when it presents itself. And I'll learn then. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a fine way, because so many people kind of get into this analysis paralysis around, I don't have my MBA. I haven't experienced this yet. I'm afraid that I'm going to make a mistake. And then they kind of just don't move forward either.
Yeah, no, I think that that's right. And like I said, I don't regret any of the ways that we did anything, even the overwhelming headaches. Like the fallout with the business partner who's no longer with the company, I got divorced that same year. And I would say the fallout with the partner was harder than the divorce. Like,
wow.
But I don't regret it, because I certainly have carried on those lessons. And I know when younger people who are getting involved in business for the first time or starting their own stuff, come and talk with me about it, I have certainly learned a lot that I'm able to share with them. So it's not a problem, and it informs everything moving forward.
What are some of the things that you guide, or, sort of aha nuggets that you share with a new entrepreneur? I know you have sort of a cohort. You attract a lot of creatives and people who traditionally aren't thinking from a business standpoint. They just want to be creative and hopefully get paid for it.
Sure. And one of the things that I just want to say, that you certainly didn't coach me to say anything in advance of this, but I would say to, at the very, very least, just maybe look up some YouTube videos from some reputable people who talk about some of the stuff you need to do to get your finances in order when you're starting a business. I learned a lot of, as you know as well, I learned a lot of how-tos and best practices from just kind of absorbing things from the people around me in different kinds of businesses. And there wasn't like a centerpiece of ideology around like sort of how to run things. It was just like, well, this guy said to do this, and this person said to do this. And so there was no coherent vision in how to not be a mess, And
Right.
so even the most creative person who's running a business, who's the most sort of out there, if they're going to be in charge of the business elements of running that business, I would say look at actually educating yourself a little bit about what it means to run a business. And I've read some really great books in this arena, and I certainly was more prepared than if I didn't. The business side of creativity is one that a mutual of ours, Ariel Walrath, gave to me 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And there are books that I've certainly picked up along the way in order to get oriented, and I look at videos, etc. But you can't really be over prepared.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. But obviously, I love to sit in this world and talk about this stuff all the time. And I do recognize that it can feel really overwhelming or very black and white and kind of too structured for a lot of people out there, which is why I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation today, because I think it proves that, look, from my perspective, there's very little that can't be fixed, right? And there's very little that can actually, we think of it in terms of like broken versus fixed or running well. And I think you can attest to, yes, we can get ourselves in deep water sometimes. And plenty of other people that I talk to and work with are in that same boat for one reason or another, whether it's cash flow or sales tax or, any of those many things. But the reality is there's always a way to fix it. We just have to be able to look at it, kind of face on, head on, instead of doing the ostrich thing.
Well, and I think, and this is what I've learned in the time that we've worked together, is I think what is helpful is if you're going to face it head on, it's helpful to do it with someone who matches your style of facing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've certainly done this with looked at our finances, navigated our finances with a handful of different people over time, and I've certainly learned that there are styles, and there are styles that work for me, and there are styles that do not work for me. And I think looking at it, it's always interesting doing this with you because you have a particular enthusiasm about doing it that's not like weird. You know, you could one could be enthusiastic about sort of navigating finances and be weird, but it's helpful to see that it's like just another part of the business and it's not like an alien part of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is very helpful. Like attitude and perspective are really important when you're facing this stuff, because if you're like me, I mean, my dad didn't graduate from high school and my mom got an associate's degree when she was 35 or 36. Like, I didn't grow up with higher education being a priority in the house. I didn't grow up around people who are in business. And I've since talked with people who have, you know, and who essentially say, you know, I looked at my dad, who was the CEO of a hospital, and I knew that was a possibility. For me, I grew up in a town. I'm in this town right now because of COVID. I grew up in a town where the kinds of businesses you are in were either in these all very respectful paths, but it was forestry, running a salon, running an antique shop out of your house, or running a sandwich shop. Those were the only kinds of businesses. And so the idea of navigating, quote, business, especially the finance end, is exotic and terrifying. And so if I don't do it with people who have an attitude that matches mine and is uplifting and not, you know, punitive.
Finger wagging.
Totally. I'm a mess. I can't do it.
Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate part of sort of a common aspect around financial management support, whether that's bookkeeping or accounting cleanup or tax work or whatever it might be, is that the people who traditionally work in those roles are trained to be very good at black and white stuff, right? You give me the information, I will spit it back out to you in a way that allows us to do your taxes. If you're in trouble, I will tell you very clearly, but maybe not with a ton of compassion, why you shouldn't have gotten into this circumstance in the first place. And maybe I'll map out how to fix it, but I'll make you feel like crap along the way.
Sure. And on the other end of that, or maybe in conjunction with that, is being mismatched with skill set or focus. And so I think sometimes you can, you know, a lot of people do. So within my business, I am the least creative person by way of execution. I don't produce videos. I don't shoot photography. I don't do any of that stuff. However, I have like a MacBook Pro, right? Which is a computer that is built to be more than a word processor. But for me, it's just a glorified email machine because I'm good. It's silly. I've done that before with people who work with our finances, people who are sort of, it's not to say overqualified, but they're qualified for a much bigger, much more robust, much more like a complex or complicated kind of relationship.
Or more traditional kind of big business type stuff.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that there isn't the capability to do the stuff that we do. It's just to say that like there's a cultural mismatch, and then just also the machinery is improperly built for what our needs really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I appreciate this conversation so that anybody listening can, I hope the takeaway is, again, right, we just need to find the right path, the right support, the right systems that are going to be streamlined and seamless and easy for anybody to work with without feeling overwhelmed or sort of shoulded on from an external source, you know, because this is your business and we should be growing it the way that you guys want to grow it.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's right. And you need to establish trust in order to not just find someone who can help you grow the business the way you want to grow it, but also help see things that you don't necessarily see. You know, I know a lot of ways that theoretically we want to grow, but I don't necessarily know what the manifestations of those things are, because that's not my wheelhouse. I mean, again, my background was in, you know, like comms direction for a handful of organizations and you know, contract work essentially for a decade before I got into this arena. And so I know where things want to go, but like, I'm not trained in a way where I completely understand sort of what the next organizational steps are to pull those things off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think a lot of people find themselves in that position one way or another. And there's a lot of, it can seem overwhelming,
Mhm.
thinking I've got to become X for this to be functional. And I just don't think that's true. I think your point about reading a few books, listening to some podcasts, reading some whatever, can go a long way without you feeling the need necessarily to have to hire somebody at $80,000 a year to help you make that happen either, right? There's
Totally.
all kinds of different ways to get yourself where you want to be. I want to circle back a little bit around what you guys are seeing right now, because this has been an interesting year for Knack
Yeah,
Factory in terms
sure.
of sales and how the production works. We're still in the middle of COVID. So that has had a real, shift in how you're working, number one. And number two, there is this significant push toward we need high quality video. Everybody out
Mhm.
there in the online space or off the online space needs this kind of work. What are you
Mhm.
guys seeing in the marketplace, and how has it affected you in terms of this upheaval?
Sure. So, I mean, this is, obviously this is a two-part question. So the first part is, you know, so Knack Factory, commercial video production company, started focusing pretty strongly a couple of years ago on developing our portfolio of business outside of this state, not just outside of the state of Maine, but outside of the region. We were getting larger contracts from big name clients in New York, in Boston, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, et cetera. And we saw a lot of possibility there. And plus, like, I'm a person who likes spending as much time outside of Maine as I like spending time inside of Maine. And so that was a vehicle for doing that. And we were very successful in doing that in a lot of ways. And that became our downfall this year. And the reason that
Mm.
that was our downfall was the clients of ours that have at least a foot, if not 2 feet, in the global marketplace, particularly in distribution in one way or another, were the first very
Like food work and
food
things like that,
food
right?
work, yeah, food work. People who have any products or any parts made in China, uh, they were the first people to get hit. I was looking up COVID in the middle of January, before the country even sort of decided it was a thing, because I started to get senses from some of our clients that this was interrupting them. And so by the time America decided this was an issue, we were on our very last leg. Like, we were done. And so,
Because
by the
clients
time
had just canceled or paused contracts and there was no
clients,
money coming
yeah,
in.
it totally, a lot of these big contracts we built had paused indefinitely. And it's not like we lost clients. It's just that all of our work stopped indefinitely. It's not like we necessarily, that's basically it. It was just like everyone had put everything on pause. And so we were, we were laying our staff off. I was already applying for a disaster loan again before friends of mine in these businesses even acknowledged what was happening. And so we were effectively kind of more or less, DOA for a month, 5 weeks without our staff. And fortunately, we were very first in line to get one of the PPP loans. We could do a whole episode about how messed up and wrong I think they got that program, but we happened to be, I think that there's this tendency in the country, or anywhere, it's a human nature tendency, to think that just because something worked for you, the whole thing works for everybody. The PPP accidentally worked for us.
Yep,
And
sure did.
we're a very positive story about how sometimes it worked out. Overall, I think it was poorly executed. That's for another time. But it kept us alive. It put our staff back to work, and it kept us afloat long enough to, and this is where I'm going to segue into the second part of your question, be there for clients who realized that they needed to pivot in a lot of ways with regard to how they communicate with their clients, with their audience, with their customers. A lot of people had an event plan for this year, and it was something they've been planning for 6 months, 7 months. And they need to figure out now how to still deliver that to an audience. And video is one of the ways that happens. That's been hugely beneficial to us. The other beneficial thing is the jobs that are large jobs. Again, this is something but something many may not know about a production company. Largest jobs, it's the most amount of zeros I've ever seen on a check, being a poor kid raised from Maine, and half of that goes right out the door to expenses to pay for the job. And so we were getting, you know, a handful of large jobs through the year, and that was sustaining us. Well, we've since pivoted to a lot more smaller to medium-sized jobs that we keep about 90% on, you know, in a lot of these sort of local scenarios.
Right. You can do it in-house with the staff that we have, and we don't have to farm out to a bunch of consultants. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. We're doing more in-house or with our sort of smaller family of contractors in this area, and we're keeping a lot more of the money. And then that combined with just the sad reality of other people who were in this space were not able to sustain this initial hit that happened in March and April when we were already underway. You know, I have people who are like, well, I'm just going to wait to see how this goes. And I was raised by someone who was born into the Depression. I was like, I don't ever wait for the other shoe to drop. I do not do that.
Plan. Think of forecast, think ahead. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so that really, and so Lindsay, who, you know, who works at our company, had said a couple of times, she's like, I always, you know, I kind of always thought you were paranoid, because I always talked about, you know, when we first started the business, we were coming out of the Great Recession. And I was like, no, you just haven't seen the shit hit the fan yet. You know,
you've had the good times where we're having fun, traveling all over, doing all kinds of cool work, and you haven't seen the other shoe yet.
Totally. And it does. And so you got to be ready. So it was a perfect storm for us to, as you've seen, not just come back, but I think find some strengths in the way that we operate. And again, like we're right now, this is the week of the Democratic National Convention, which is essentially happening. It's an illustration of exactly what all these businesses and small organizations that we're working with are seeing. We can't do the big thing where everyone's in a room. What are we going to do in response? We're going to have sort of a multimedia content show. And you see a lot of people, you know, I've seen a lot of people say they wish this convention was a little more produced and a little less essentially like people zooming at you, you know?
Yeah.
And I agree, obviously, because I'm a video producer, but I think that we're seeing a lot of people say, why don't we just do this more? And I agree. I think that we're going to see a lot of stuff that used to be resource heavy, very resource heavy, to put on these events. You obviously still need face-to-face stuff. Obviously, you obviously still need when we can all get in rooms safely together again. You need that camaraderie. But we're realizing a lot of that stuff was just a waste of money, a waste of fuel, a waste of energy.
We could get into the whole financial aspect of conventions and go to town for hours, but like I absolutely agree with you. What I like about, there's so much silver lining happening, even though we're still in the middle of whatever this is.
Sure.
It has been long enough, and there have been enough shifts to be able to start to pick out kind of what are the positives out of this unprecedented situation. And some of them are people getting really, really clear about what do we actually need versus what have we always been doing. And it turns out that that's fluff, and big budgets for binders. I mean, just materials alone is bonkers. And if we can shift those resources and become much more streamlined as an organization, whether you're a small mom and pop or the DNC, I think that's a benefit from a, you know, just global positioning. Who do we really want to be? Do we want to just be spending massive amounts of money because we always have? Like, I think that there's a thought process that's beneficial that's going on for a lot of businesses right now.
Totally. And it's across the board. I mean, we're talking about small nonprofits that didn't exist more than 2 years ago, who I've seen make this pivot, to, you know, companies in Maine that are competing on an international level, to, you know, companies in the region who are competing on an international level, who
higher education.
Absolutely. Who are trying to figure out how to change the way that they're getting their messages to people. Because I've seen exactly what you've seen, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know it. I not know it about me, but know the reality you're talking about is when we were first starting, when our company was first starting, I was helping a friend of mine who has a speaker manufacturing business. I was helping him build speakers to just keep money in my pocket while the business was starting. And part of that was like going to trade shows and then getting familiar with the consumer electronics trade show arena, and then seeing sort of education trade shows around that. And at the time, I mean, even before we made this pivot, even back when Knack Factory was more commercial photography than video, I was like, they could do this in a way more efficient way than they're doing it now. then, I know companies that are comparatively smaller than other companies, and their trade show budget is $500,000 to $1 million a year. What a waste of money. It's not to say that it's always a waste, because you do need to, whatever they say, I hate the expression, but like pound the flesh and shake hands.
I know.
But you don't need to do it that way.
And I think that there has been a tendency, or in certain circles, especially from the advertising marketing side, a tendency to be leery of trying to connect the dots between that kind of spend and what kind of income is actually attached to it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I have a really hard time with that. And, I certainly had to be on the front end from a marketing strategy. What are we doing? How are we getting our name out there standpoint in various businesses and for my own now? And so I don't mean to sound like a Pollyanna around those marketing people are just spendaholics, but, because I get it. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. That is sort of a truism at some basic level. But I just think there's not a lot of analysis, and that doesn't have to take a lot of time. You don't need to hire 4 people to analyze your marketing spend, even if you're a gajillion-dollar business. You just need a few people to understand what's going on and be able to
Right.
connect the dots.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I think a lot in marketing, and we all know this in our hearts if we don't know it in our heads, but a lot of trends in marketing are based exclusively off everyone else is doing it.
Yes.
And that is the trade show infrastructure in the biggest way. And that's a lot of trends, not just trade show is, well, if I don't show up, someone else is going to capture the attention. And, there is absolutely some truth to that. That's not untrue. But are you measuring what you're losing versus what you are actually gaining? Do you even know what you're gaining?
It's a lot of fear-based gut response, I think.
Right. Which, as we know, is not the best way to manage it.
It's killer though, because we're all susceptible to it. It's like, my God, I'm going to I saw it a lot in the engineering world here in New Hampshire when in my previous life, there's this tendency, especially in this professional service world, and, people with letters after the names, engineers, lawyers, medical professionals, to spend advertising dollars for professional associations.
Yes.
And the only people who see that are your competition. But there's this real weird ego thing attached to it. Like, well, of course we have to spend $5,000 a year to have our quarter page ad in the annual report. Like, because why? No one's reading that, least of all our clients. But,
no, absolutely. And I think, and I'm a little, probably more than typical business people, like I'm a little woo-woo in these areas. And so I really believe in things like, if you're having a feeling that's kind of problematic to your overall operation, maybe explore that feeling and figure out where it's from, and figure out not just its root in you, but its overall root. And what people don't know about fear, especially fear of missing out, is it literally comes from primate survival. The idea, we used to live in clusters of 10 to 20 people sort of out in the woods. If we got pushed out of that circle, we literally died, because we depended on the group in order to keep things alive. And that's where evolutionarily that feeling and fear comes from. And it's a very real and important thing. It's real because it actually manifests in actual feelings in us. It doesn't necessarily, unpaired with our other skill sets and intuitions, it doesn't necessarily on its own yield anything for us.
Not in today's world, for sure. And it does have very real ramifications in terms of, adrenal spikes and cortisol havoc and all of that kind of stuff. And if we don't have, I call it bear brain.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
My version of this around the money thing is, we think a grizzly is coming to eat our face. If we're faced with a situation of I'm going to miss out, or I don't know how to set my prices, or whatever it is that's making that feeling in our stomach, like we want to throw up a little bit, but it's not real. It's just based on a new situation that we've never faced before. Right. So there is no bear, and if we can work that sort of mind-body connection a little bit more, I think it gets a little bit easier. But yeah, it's amazing how much it comes up in entrepreneurship, because it feels like every decision we make is going to be the make or break of our business. And even I think 10 years, 12 years, 20 years in, there's still some of that, no matter how much experience you have. So we have to be aware of it so that we can manage it well.
Yeah, people I used to jokingly say this, but it's true. When people would talk about the various skill sets of our partners and employees. And I used to say my primary and sort of most marketable skill set is I don't take no personally. which is to say, like, so much of navigating business and management are these scenarios where if you applied them to your personal life, it would make you sad. It would make you sad to ask for a lot of money and then it'd be told no because it's a it's a rejection or
personal value statement. Mm-hmm.
Precisely. And through a lot, again, this is all more woo-woo stuff, but through reading a lot of literal Zen related stuff when I was in my late teens and doing a lot of ego work, getting my ego out of the way has been hands down my best business skill.
Talk to me a little bit about how the partnership works, because I know that, you've spent a lot of time figuring out who's going to be responsible for what. Like, what does that look like in a small creative firm?
So I would say was just talking with a friend on the phone about exactly this, who was asking sort of about partnership related stuff because of his own work. And I'm starting to realize, and this makes sense because I think personally, every 2 to 3 years we go through personal cycles. And so I'm starting to realize that our partnership has about an every 2-year cycle. So Kurt, most simply, Kurt, my business partner, oversees the day-to-day production reality of running a video production company. He delegates tasks, he onboards the projects, he figures out who's doing what. If equipment's not working, like, he sorts through that. If there's sort of day-to-day personnel stuff he sees, he sorts through that. And then I handle basically everything else. I handle everything that seems existential to the day-to-day operation. And maybe 3 years ago, I felt more like I had to micromanage stuff. And maybe that was more about me than it was about my partner. But I think it had to do with us figuring out what,
you mean like project management kind of stuff overlap?
Just, there? Yeah, I think project management stuff. I think we necessarily both didn't have the whole skill sets that we needed in order to stay out of each other's way. And so a handful of things have changed since. I think just like one, I started operating out of Nashville, which is 12 to 1,300 miles away from Portland. And so just staying out of the way helped us figure out how to work more independently of each other in a way that's actually been extraordinarily valuable. We adopted way more streamlined communication techniques via Slack in particular has been one of the biggest game changers for us, so that we're in touch as much as we need to be, and then we're largely out of each other's way. And then there's just an expectation of both, how would I say this? Like, much more expectation of transparency, both by way of what you offer and what you receive, So the expectation is if you have something that needs to be brought up and we need to work through, and obviously we have all the weekly meetings, we need quarterly meetings, annual meeting, etc. But just on a day-to-day basis, there's way more faith that has been learned through the experience of working together, not something that we set up by way of a system, that if something needs to be addressed or worked out, or if there's an issue with a client, there's an issue with the employee, there's an issue overall or whatever, person A brings it to person B and they work it through and figure out what the next steps are. And again, I think a lot of that also comes from sort of the shedding the ego stuff. Like, there's a lot less taking stuff personally as friends, because we come from a friend background, and a lot more just going, easy. Right. A lot more just going, we're doing this in the best interest of the business.
That's awesome. What have been the biggest hurdles from a financial management standpoint for you guys?
Oh, geez. Well, like I said earlier,
you don't have to list them all.
No, I mean, like I said earlier, I just think largely it comes from, from Kurt's experience, he as a manager, and he's worked in more sort of corporate structures, and has been sort of a top level manager in the execution side of production in those structures, but he hasn't necessarily been close to money management internally. Like I said, my heroes of business were sandwich shop owners and foresters. Like, I don't have a background in that area. So really the biggest issue is a more abstract one. It's just learning enough to feel comfortable in the arena. And then things like, because we weren't comfortable, there are various ways that we pursued funding or tried to accrue funding that we're now literally paying for. The kinds of loans that we got ourselves involved in, or the kinds of credit that we used. We're in a very good path to untangling them now. I feel more financially healthy today than we ever have, light years beyond. But there are certainly, essentially lost years in which we didn't know what we were doing. And so we were basically just doing the thing that seemed most evident at the time rather than acting from a place of wisdom.
Yeah, and I think we also carry that grief or guilt or stress about those circumstances a lot too, like long into, like, oh, I wish that if we hadn't done that. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were talking about financial decisions they'd made, and basically were like, if I hadn't done that, I'd have $150,000 in the bank right now. And my perspective on that is, yes, that may be true, but is that the most effective focus of our energy and our time? Because the reality is you also learn some stuff. You're probably not going to do it that particular way again. And it doesn't mean that all is lost. We just have to move forward kind of from okay, here's where I actually want to go. And here's what I'm not going to do to try and get there because I found out it doesn't work.
You have to kill that part of yourself, because I was thinking about this the other day. I spent my 20s, overwhelmed with class resentment because I grew up poor. I knew people who had all these opportunities because I think that maybe they didn't earn or deserve them. They just had it because of proximity, et cetera, et cetera. And I was so overwhelmed with that cloud that I didn't pursue my own opportunities. I didn't see opportunities through because I became a little bit of an opportunity nihilist because of all of my personal hangups about money, etc. Any hangup you have, you need to recognize and work through, because if you don't, you're getting in your own way from sort of acknowledging the actual reality and then moving forward from there. Great, you could have had $150,000. That's fantastic. You don't. So what are you going to do right now rather than wallow to figure out how you're going to maybe not have $150,000, but figure out what the goals are that make sense and then execute upon those goals?
Yep. I couldn't have said it better myself. We could just be done with the whole show right now. Perfect.
That's all.
That's all. We're just done. Do you have any other takeaways for our listeners today from a video production standpoint, from a business building standpoint?
Sure. Yeah, I think strictly from a video production standpoint, I should make a plug about what we do. I have a feeling that if you, the person who is running a business, looks at your overall marketing approach and how you're getting in front of your audience, you're missing a lot of opportunities to do so. I'm not going to say inexpensively, because video production is not inherently inexpensive, but effectively and in ways that you can reuse over time, over and over, if you are not taking seriously video production. And that applies across the board. And one of the places I think people get lost in figuring that out is there are so many channels, as you know. I mean, we're operating on just one of the kinds of channels that you can use media production to get in front of an audience. And I think a lot of people, again, because they're so clouded by what the possibilities are, they shut down. Someone says that they need to have some YouTube videos, and then someone says, well, what about TikTok? TikTok's coming up, and they're like, well, I need to do TikTok too. And then they just shut down because they can't even imagine what they're supposed to do. The reality is you just need to find what makes sense for your audience, try something out, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, figure out what your pivot point is and then work accordingly. Not doing something is not an option. And sticking to your ineffective, bloated way of spending your budget right now is also not effective.
Yeah. I think it's super easy to be like, well, I'll just keep doing Facebook ads and hope that it finally turns a corner, even though they may not be set up properly or with the right, whatever. Yeah. I think that comes back to our inherent inability to sometimes know when to pull the trigger, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's this idea of, if I just stick with it, I put this plan in place, I don't want to devalue the plan and the time and effort that I spent getting to this point. So we're just going to try a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And all of a sudden it's 2 years later and we've spent $200,000 in a budget that we didn't have, and we didn't go anywhere with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, just my baseline, this is going back to both Brian Wilson and the Buddha, which I feel like are two fantastic business icons, is you just have to kill your ego as much as you can. And this goes across the board for every element of your life. It is your primary enemy, is the hangups you have around your ego. I understand how and why it's hard to get around it, but all of the responses you have that are responding to your own ego there's a strong chance it's sticking you in a box you can't see, and you're getting in your way at every juncture.
Yep. I love that. All right. Last question that everybody gets. What does Zen money mean for you?
I think that it's related to what I just said. I used to think that, because again, a lot of the class related hangups I was talking about earlier, I used to think that understanding what to do with money, both by way of a business organization and by way of an individual, was something that belonged to a class of person that I am not. And so I think, again, looking at it both from a business perspective and a personal perspective, like, this is a tool that helps you navigate the world and helps you navigate life and helps you ideally navigate some success, and not like a thing that someone had more of and so screw them. is your friend. That's the way to look at it. It will help you get beyond. And I've started, as a result, sort of investing more personally and looking into and working around some of the stuff in cryptocurrency, and just like looking at different ways that I enjoy to pursue these arenas, because there, as you know, and I'm sure this is an endless conversation for you, there's not just one way to go down this path. There are so many ways to build that strength. But you first, in order to build that strength, need to pretty much get rid of every preconception you have about it.
Yeah, and it's a task that takes patience and focus and being kind to ourselves along the way. That's I think on the other side of the kill your ego piece, I would say that is be patient and be kind with yourself. I was talking with someone the other day who was, essentially trying to untangle an internet conspiracy, right? She was trying to get to the bottom of it because I think she's coming from a good place, but believes in a conspiracy. And so we were having a conversation back and forth about it. And she said, thank you for being patient with this conversation. And it's so frustrating because you think you're onto one thing and then you get onto another thing. And I was like, the cruel, hilarious reality of your life is you spend the whole thing trying to untangle things. You'll never get to the bottom of it, and then you die. And if you accept that, you can then be way nicer to yourself about not having the answers, because you will never get there. There will never be answers. The journey truly is the destination. Yeah, there's never any one point. And I think this is so true from a money standpoint in particular. We have this voice in our head that says, if I get to X, then everything will be great. I will feel better. My life will be magical. Things will sparkle, and it's just going to be awesome. And the reality is that never happens. You hit that next stage in revenue, or you hit that next hire, or your business does A, B, or C, or you're able to fund your kids' college, whatever it is. And by the time you reach there, your focus is already on something else, right? We never actually sit and say, oh, hey, I reached this plateau. This is amazing. I hit a milestone. Because we're already 700 yards up the field, and it's that version, we're never going to reach it,
Right. And we know that to be factually true from a sociological and neurological standpoint. That's not just a theory. We know this to be true. The people who have the most money in their bank accounts they certainly don't have the same stresses necessarily, but they absolutely, we know, have the same battle and inability to center and appreciate, and as a result feel depleted and depressed.
Yep. Yeah. More money does not solve the problem, other than, the whole up to whatever it was in 2006 when when Purdue did that study with, it was what, 80 or 90,000 gets you to kind of that first level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then above and beyond that, I call that the triangle of opportunity, because we could stop there and be like, hey, money isn't going to make me any happier. But if you're a business owner, that potential to earn more, maybe we flip that conversation and say, it's not just about accumulating money so that I can buy a yacht and sit around and be unhappy. It's about what could we do with that additional ability to affect change in the world.
That's oh God, that's exactly. I was just again having this exact conversation with a friend who's built a very successful podcast. As a result, have really nice revenue from it, have a lot of good stuff that comes from that. And they're like, what do I do with this? And I'm like, well, what do you want to make? You know, because for them to this point, the idea of incoming cash is like, that's the end of it. I'm like, well, now you have an opportunity to make something. What do you want to make? And they're like, oh, okay. You know, and that's exactly as you just said it. That's absolutely right on.
That's the whole point of the Zen Money Map, my second book, because I was having that same conversation with a lot of my clients who were like, we want to feel better about this. We like the idea of Zen money. We want to be able to grow our businesses. But again, the end goal was always to be able to say that we made 7 figures. I'm not sure. Like, that wasn't super clear. And so they weren't really connecting with the changes that needed to happen to get them to that point until we could target it around. It's not just about hitting that milestone. It's what you do with it once you achieve it so that it's meaningful for us.
Yeah, I agree. That's it.
We could talk about this all day, but you're a busy guy. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.